Good afternoon. The County Board is in session. Welcome to our CIP wrap-up work session on a very hot July 16. Before I begin today, however, I would like to say, as speaking for the board, that we were all horrified by Saturday's assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump and the tragic death and injury of bystanders at his rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. We know this violent attack undoubtedly has shaken our nation and our community, given our proximity to the nation's capital and how many of our residents work in the federal government. Even when events like this happen elsewhere, they always feel close to home. As an elected body, we usually stay out of national politics, but this event is really not so much about politics as it is about what we stand for as a democratic nation. We want to say that we align with our president and with national leaders on both sides of the aisle who agree that violence has no place in our public life. Everything should be done to reduce tensions and inflammatory posturing. This is a moment to unite around civility, especially because our elections are just around the corner. So therefore, we join leaders from all parties across the country in denouncing political violence has no place in our democracy and should never be a means to influence elections or disrupt a hallmark of our constitutional history and practice, which is the peaceful transfer of power. And we just ask that everyone also, as you process what happened, and thankfully what didn't happen, we extend patience and kindness to one another as we go into this election season. So thank you all. And with that, I think we're ready to get into our wrap-up on the CIP. Since the CIP was released in late May, we have had 3 work sessions to discuss the manager's proposal, a joint work session with the school board, and the public hearing. The purpose of this work session is to finalize any changes by the county board so that the final action can be taken by the board at our recessed meeting on Tuesday, July 23rd, and this gives staff enough time to prepare the appropriate documents for action, make sure all the numbers work out right. Unlike the operating budget, we're not going to be taking any individual appropriation actions. Also, please remember, for folks listening, I know folks in this room know well, this is a 10-year plan. The first 2 years are firm, and the remaining 8 years can change in the next update of the CIP. And we'll all know, actually, I won't be here. Y'all will be back here in 2 short years from now to revisit all of these issues and probably some more. So today's discussion will focus on wrapping up the discussions we've already had from our earlier work sessions, and then we'll hear a brief recap and overview of the CIP schedule, preview of the bond referenda questions, presentation from our Fiscal Affairs Advisory Commission, who is maybe here or here virtually, and then we will break into board discussion about the proposed CIP. I'd like to remind everybody that today's presentations are available on the county website, of course, arlingtonva.us, and now I will turn it over to our manager to walk through the specifics of today's wrap-up discussion. Mark, over to you.
Yep, thanks. So what we're going to do is we'll start off with a preview of bond referenda questions. And then, as you noted, we can go through the fact material. I've asked, I think Jason is going to go through a real short presentation that includes a little bit summary of some of the debt service, but also the bond referendum questions. And then I'm going to turn it over to Michelle to handle sort of the bulk of the Q&A, and I'll be here as needed. So over to you, Jason.
Thank you, Mark. So I really just want to start off with, we're going to do a quick refresher just on the county's debt service and the growth over the 10 years. And then from there, we'll talk about, some of the other policies like our 10%. And then we'll go into the questions and answers on the upcoming referendum or the proposed questions and explanations. So that's the process. So we'll do that rather quickly. If we go to slide 2 of the presentation, you've seen this before. This is when we presented the CIP. As of right now, there's no changes to the proposed level of debt, so these numbers are the same of what you saw before. But what you can see is that over the 10 years, we do have rather moderate debt service growth. It has annual increases in the general fund projected of about $4 to $7 million in most years. That's that yellow highlighted row right there. So you see it's on the moderate side, but the growth in debt service, it comes to roughly 3.6% annually in terms of the growth, which remains in line with, and you look on the right side in the orange, the 10-year growth in our the county's general fund revenues is about 4.4%. So within that policy, we still remain, even though it's moderate, within those constraints. So if we go to the next slide, this is, the policy that people typically think about when we talk about issuing debt, which is our 10%. So you see over the 10 years that right now we are about 8.8%, but given the level of debt, which on the general fund side is there's planned about $940 million of new bonds. With that issued over the 10-year time frame, we get to around 9.8%, which is our peak in fiscal 2031 and 2032. So while we have that little bit of space, it is what we felt was the most we could fit over the 10-year time frame, while leaving us a little bit of flexibility in those out years to react. Should things change between now and then, we could pivot and change or reduce amounts or make adjustments as necessary, but this is where we are right now. So if we go to the next slide. Now, what we'll talk about here is the actual, what we're planning to put on the 2024 referendum. So over the full 10 years, there's about $2 billion of bonds planned to be issued between the county and the county's proposed CIP and what the schools adopted on their side. That's about $941 million for the county, $473 million for schools, $361 million for utilities, and $472 million for stormwater. But that's over 10 years. As you know, we only issue bonds on referenda for really the first 2 years of projects, and a little bit for if a project takes a few more years than that, for those remaining years as well. So of that amount, there is a total of $272.6 million that will be proposed to go in the 2024 referenda this November. On the county side, we have the typical 3 categories, which are community infrastructure, local parks and recreation, and metro and transportation. $76 million for community infrastructure, $25.8 for parks and recreation, and then $72.4 for metro and transportation. Utilities, they have $14.2 million on the referenda, and then public schools has $84 million on their 2024 referenda, and stormwater this cycle does not have any, but they do plan in the out years to have a request. So if we go to the next slide, slide 5. Now what we'll do is I'll just show you the questions and explanations. I'm not going to read all of these. What I will say is that these are generally the same format that we have put for the last 4 or 5 cycles for bond referenda. The same general type of question and explanation. The explanation mostly is the one that changes because other than the amounts that we have to include the major projects that is financing. Anything that's more than 10% of an issuance, we have to note in the explanation piece. So here we have metro and transportation, $72.4 million. Most of that is for metro. If we go to the next slide, this is parks and recreation, the $25.77 million. And major projects there for the 3 urban parks, bridge modernization, maintenance capital, and then an athletic field conversion. Next slide. This is community infrastructure, $76.15 million. Major projects here are the Arlington Neighborhoods Program, facilities maintenance capital, the Courts Police building improvements, Carlin Springs site, and a few others. Next slide. For the utilities fund, they're requesting the $14.2 million. The major bulk of this 9.4 is for our contributions to the Washington Aqueduct system. And then there's some funding for water main replacement and the activated sludge effluent ASE1 project at the water pollution control plant. And then next slide. And then here, the last referenda question would be for Arlington Public Schools, $83.99 million. And you see below their explanation and the 4 major projects that they were proposing with that funding. So with that, I know it's very quick, but those are the questions and explanations that we have as they are proposed right now. And I think the next part of our agenda would be then to have the fact presentation.
Yes.
Or pause there for any questions.
No, that's great. I think Ms. Burgess is online, so we'll have that next. But I want to just pause here and see if colleagues had any kind of questions they'd like to have.
I have just
Yeah.
one quick clarification back, I think it's on your second or third slide, that shows the table of all of the,
Here.
back, one more.
Slide 4? Or?
There you go. So can you just remind us, when we think about the debt service metrics that we try to stay within, are all of those included, so county schools and AHIF wrapped together in terms of our total debt service limits and that sort of thing?
That is correct, right?
Great.
We look at it at a holistic level, so, and we include, even though AHIF right now is actually a line of credit, so it's not long-term debt.
Right.
We know that we will be permanently financing that with bonds, so we have included it in our calculations. So, but it is on a combined basis, and when I say combined, it's just the county and schools. Utility fund being an enterprise fund, and that they have their own coverage, that's excluded, and stormwater, the expectation, that's also an excluded, they're now an enterprise fund as well. So
Yep.
it's just the county and schools.
So then on the next page, when you show that we're not hitting the 10%, that's the sum of all three of these?
Correct.
That are general?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then one other question, I don't know if this is the right time for it or not, but I know we've had some conversation about bond premiums and how they fit into both the debt service, where they're free, if I understand it, and PAYGO, or sort of the availability of funds. Could you give a quick summary of that for the public so people are following along?
Sure. Yep. So when we issue a bond, the way it's structured, there's generally, in the current interest rate environments, given that it's a low interest rate environment, there's a preference for higher coupons on those bonds. And so I think Alfred, we're happy to give you all a bond 101 because it does get confusing, to see the movements. But what that ultimately means is that when we issue bonds, there is typically a little bit additional premium, it's called bond premium, that comes in the current environment. There have been environments where it could be a discount, and then you actually have to issue additional bonds to bring in funding. What we typically do, because it could be a big variation, is that it covers, it'll cover some of our costs of issuance when we issue the bonds, but also when there's additional, to the extent that we receive it, we don't know what we'll receive, if any. So at the end of the year, we'll typically appropriate it at closeout process. We'll identify if there are projects. It goes into our PAYGO, pay-as-you-go funding. And so when we have capital projects, and they're CIP, they're not operating projects, they're capital, we will identify any that need funding that are within PAYGO. So you'll see within PAYGO that there is, a large mix of projects receiving that allocation. It helps to support those projects that could be eligible for bond funding. We'll get a portion of those proceeds.
And I would just note that sorry. You will see that if you look back in the operating budget, this all comes to the board for approval. So we say, all right, here are our proposed projects for '25. We have this remaining premium from the last bond sale. Here's how we propose allocating it to specific projects, which you all then approve. And because we can't predict that level, as Jason just said, it has been a source for unexpected costs, right? So on occasion, that is, if you will, part of our reserve to be able to deal with it. But Jason's right, it's a little bit of a complicated topic, and he would love to spend hours with you talking about it.
Great.
Anything else?
Nope, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you. And I'll just insert real quick on the first chart that Susan wanted to look at. That's, in part, that's how the rating agencies look at it, right? Is that they break it out this way, and they're most concerned about the schools and, what we're doing, whereas they're not maybe as concerned about the utilities because those are self-funding. Is that the way it works?
They look at all of them, but they primarily, for the county's sovereign rating for the general government, it is just the combined county schools. They don't look at it on an individual basis because for them, all of the debt is a responsibility of Arlington County as a whole.
Yeah, they don't really
not
care
individual.
about,
Correct.
just they can handle it all. Okay.
So as long as utility fund, stormwater fund, as long as they meet their coverage ratios and they continue to meet those debt service obligations, those amounts will be excluded from when they look at the county's general rating.
Thank you. And we'll have to do that bond discussion at some point, but not right now. Dennis.
On the bond premium, I always wondered, I understand there's the cost of borrowing that money from the market, plus, because, we're a special type of a borrower, plus whatever the additional is to the rate. That for that normally we hold a reserve to manage the fluctuation of this kind of impact, because we have that impact always, right?
We have what, I'm sorry?
A reserve to manage that impact. I mean,
So when you look at what's in the CIP and the planned debt, so the debt and the projections includes what's based on what we call it's the coupon rate of the bond. So we have the projections in the CIP actually assume that there will most likely be some level of bond premium received, but the debt service is actually more fixed and known. And so the way we budget it is the more predictable manner that we, it's on the coupon basis. So we usually issue 4% and 5% coupons on the bonds and our general obligation bonds. And those are known. Then what happens is between the price and that determines a premium on the bond. Again, we'll do it in a 101 session, but the way we do it, it's easier to predict what the level of debt service will be so that we're not surprised by an unexpected fluctuation in the municipal markets.
the coupons are nominal, right? So they are like 3% or 4%.
We issue between 4% and 5%. It's our discretion on where, and that's the preference from investors is 4% to 5%, which is above what the yields in the market
So
are.
on that slide, I had actually one question that I never really reconciled in my mind. So the third line from the top, the debt service on AHEF and Barcroft. So we are paying off the Barcroft debt, right? Yet the debt service stays relatively stable and high in 10.4, 0.5.
So what you see there is in fiscal 25 and 26, that's interest only.
Yes.
And so as you know, there were two one-time pay downs with closeout funding that went to bring down the fund from 150 to 120. What you see, why it jumps up in fiscal 27 is because we start amortizing the debt in fiscal 27. The assumption is right now it's a line of credit. In fiscal 2027, we have an assumption that we would issue permanent debt to take out the line of credit. And at that point, we would start paying off the principal as well. And so that would be a higher ultimate cost with some interest and then some principal actually paying off. So that's the major reason why you see the change in the increase.
So that would be then the rate of amortization, so the stable payoff.
Right.
Except if we decide to pay some capital off if we can.
Right, to the extent there's any more paid down early would reduce those numbers.
Yeah, that's fine. My only issue was that it was AHEF and Barcroft, because AHEF is a different type of money, right? So, okay.
Okay, thank you. Matt?
Thank you. Slide 5, I just want to take another quick look at. So I was trying just to, and forgive me if I could have sort of seen this before. I was trying to sort of see in the explanation how closely it adds up towards the 72, and in the other explanations, it's not going to be precise, but there's a good chunk in this explanation that is not quite accounted for. And I wondered if you could say more about why that is, or just help me a little bit to understand.
There's no reason per se. So the state code prescribes that in explanations to bond referendum questions, that we must include any project that takes up more than 10% of the total. Beyond that is more at your discretion. So it depends on how long you want the explanation to be when we prepare the documentation. So there are, I think there's 3 or 4 other smaller projects within transportation. And so
66 gets to 69, it's just 3 million.
it starts getting smaller. And so that's the only reason that if the board wanted us to add extras, we could add those smaller amounts too. But it's generally that once you get below the 10%, it's not required. And we do have a limit that while this is well below the number, but it has to be also less than 500 words.
Yeah, it has to
each
fit on the ballot.
explanation. So
It's literally about fitting this information on one page to hand to voters. And
we can't use legal terms. We have to use
Yeah.
plain English. So that the average person can understand easily. And we couldn't talk about the bonds 101 type of questions in the in the explanation.
No, I think my math wasn't quite as precise, but I think the other 2 explanations, if I recall correctly, or 3, all get kind of close without being so granular as to limit us too much, keeping in mind the last sentence that is in each of the various pieces. Thanks very much.
Okay, I think we're set. No more questions? Thank you, Mr. Fries.
Thank you.
I think now we turn it over to our Fiscal Affairs Advisory Commission, and Jillian Burgess, I understand, is online virtually with us to make our presentation. Jillian, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, good.
I am. Thank you so
Good.
much. Thank you so much for having us. The Fiscal Affairs Advisory Commission, it's a bit of a different process with the CIP. We mainly review the CIP during the months between proposal and wrap up as homework in subcommittees and over email. And then we met last Thursday to discuss in person, virtually, our observations, answers to our questions, and our general thoughts on the CIP. We did have a number of recommended questions for the work sessions, which we had sent to the board before each work session. Thank you very much. We noted that many of those were brought up, and we got answers during the work session, so thank you. We also reviewed the work sessions and the materials that the county staff posted online. Thank you very much to staff. That's all very, very helpful. And we had a couple follow-up questions for county staff that they promptly addressed. So we really appreciate everyone's work there. We've summarized all of that in this follow-up report that has different sections. We've sent you the questions again, just so you have them all in one place. We also include a number of future considerations. And the first part of the report, which is the big shebang, is our recommendations, which we discussed and voted on last Thursday. So I wanted to highlight very quickly, I won't go through all of the future considerations, but the one I wanted to highlight is the first one at the beginning, which is FAC has long beaten the drum of increased performance measures and improved performance measures, and we've seen a lot of effort in the operating budget to improve performance measures and more explicitly tie our expenditures to our comprehensive plans and targets that we have as a county. We would love to see more of that come into the CIP and more clarity with these capital plans and how the proposed capital plan funding relates to those comprehensive plan targets. So we're spending X on trails, and that relates to the master transportation plan in Y way. We're spending Z on community centers, and that relates to the public spaces master plan in this way, that sort of thing. There's a little bit in the proposal now, but we would appreciate seeing more. So now I'd just like to go over the recommendations. We had a small but mighty group on Thursday, and we unanimously voted to recommend that the county board adopt the CIP as proposed by the manager with a few tweaks. These tweaks do not add to the overall level of spending, but instead are about sort of shifting money or focus. The first one is within transportation. The FAC recommends that the county board shift some local funding from the conversion of battery electric buses for Arlington Transit to restore complete streets projects that are delayed in the proposed CIP, particularly those studies that will improve non-car accessibility to Arlington schools, such as the Carlin Springs Road study. We have some detail in there on some things that could be done to decrease the local funding. But our main thought here is that delaying the critical transportation studies will impact our ability to efficiently apply for grant funding as we go forward. And while we do appreciate that the master transportation plan is being developed right now, the carbon neutral transportation plan is also being developed right now. And so this is sort of one of those things where in both realms, we need to walk and chew gum at the same time. We need to be moving the ball forward with improving our transportation network and with decreasing our carbon emissions while we develop a more comprehensive plan for how we will do both. And we think that specifically these studies and the improving accessibility for Arlington schools for those not in cars can lead to cost savings for both the county and the school system. We wanted to underscore that we are not intending this shift to signal that climate action should be devalued. In fact, the very opposite. We view that the Complete Streets projects could be an important tool for reducing our community's carbon footprint, and would expect that the Complete Street projects to be used for this funding to be used for projects that are most effective towards shifting people away from single occupancy vehicle use. Our second recommendation is about the Resiliency Hub at Lover Run. This was not a change to the level of funding, but instead a concern for that investment being in a fixed location. We support the development of resiliency infrastructure in Arlington. We are just focused on maximizing the potential for the investments to reach residents in greatest need in any particular emergency. So we recommend that we shift the focus of that funding from a fixed resiliency hub in one location at Lover Run Community Center to be movable resiliency infrastructure that can be deployed in different areas of the county where there is need. And then finally, echoing what you heard from the Climate Change and Energy Efficiency Commission, we recommend that Arlington County use the Climate Action Fund for projects that reduce our contribution to climate change, such as projects that serve to reduce carbon emissions, and use other funding for projects that respond to the results of climate change, such as resiliency. So this also relates to the Resiliency Hub and using climate action funds for that. But we also noted that there are a number of projects in the proposed CIP that are funded with general fund dollars that would serve to reduce carbon emissions, such as transportation projects or retrofitting buildings to reduce carbon emissions. And we thought there might be room there to switch some of those from the general fund to the Climate Action Fund, leaving the resiliency projects funded by the general fund. So I'm happy to take questions, happy to go more into any of the specific future considerations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, colleagues, any questions for our FAC? Susan?
Not a question, just a huge thank you, both for the tight turnaround as usual and the depth of analysis. Has been very helpful for all of us up here. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, Maureen.
I'd love to ask a question about the performance measures recommendation. I think when it comes to the operating budget, it might be a little bit more intuitive in terms of what a successful performance of most of those programs look like. When FAC was discussing that, were they thinking about, fiscal targets, right? Like percentage on budget, percentage on time, things like that? Or are they thinking more about individual project specific goals and attainability?
So we were more thinking about the targets that are in the comprehensive plan. So for example, there are targets within the public spaces master plan about related to turf fields and the maintenance and growth of turf fields. There's some analysis of demand in that plan as far as where we have various parks resources and where there's demand for them, and then where there's a need. And then and similarly in transportation, there are some targets within the transportation master plan. And we just see that there's some areas where we could say, if we commit this level of funding to whatever specific project it is, it relates to the comprehensive plan in this way and goes to this target. It's a little hard to be more clear quickly on this call, and we haven't done a deep dive into it because there's just a lot of diversity there. But we are very, we've talked about doing a deep dive into this area and being more specific with recommendations for the city.
No, that's helpful. I think it almost reminds me of like instructional curricula, right? Being able to say like this lesson plan relates to curricula 1.2 or something, and always having that tracking. But I think that's really helpful. I think it'd be interesting to explore that. I know that our staff are doing a lot of really good work, and adding more things is always hard to figure out. But you know, I think as we think long term, especially with a CIP that is 10 years, really making sure we're balancing and fitting across the many, many, many different priorities at a reasonable rate is cool.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. We also will probably find that some of them apply to more than one, which is somebody has brought up. Takis, and then we'll go to Matt.
So thank you, Madam Chair. I echo the deep thanks for the thinking and for the working and for innovative thinking as well. So I have two questions, actually, and one is a little bit easier and the other is a little bit more, probably a lot more complex. The easier one is, I heard you saying that we can walk and chew bubble gum at the same time when it comes to plan for major arterials, you know, to have some priorities done and not have to wait for the bulk of the master transportation plan to be done. So can you be more specific about that? So for example, would that be South Carlin Springs Street Road or what else?
Yeah, South Carlin Springs is the one that really jumps to mind. George Mason might be another one that touches a lot of schools in particular. And that is a major arterial that the study that we could start the study on. And really, from a fact perspective, our concern is that if we don't start the studies, then we won't be in a place to apply for grant funding. So if we have a number of years with no studies going on, at the end of those years, we won't have the basis to apply for grants. And so we really think you need to keep the pipeline of studies going so that we can apply for grants efficiently. And of course, that grant money is not Arlington taxpayer, not directly paid for by the county. And so it's a very efficient way to fund our projects.
Yeah, I read it also backwards as saying, oh, we need to maybe fine-tune our work on the master transportation plan to be more deliberate on specific places because we recognize in advance that we have challenges there. Could it be as well? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that works too. I also think that it sounds like the county is working on two transportation plans at the same time, the carbon neutral transportation plan and the master transportation plan. It's not entirely clear to us how that fits together and what impact that will have. But it was also confusing to us that the projects relating to the master transportation plan seem to be paused for that plan to move forward, but the projects related to the carbon neutral transportation plan were moving forward. So, even though the plan's not done.
Sub question to that. So there was some testimony that we received, especially from the Transportation Commission, but also from residents in general, that they couldn't see the connection between some of the plans that we have underway or have completed and the implementation money in the future CIP. Or you know, plans that are in studies that are in process, but the implementation money doesn't materialize. Was that a topic of conversation at all?
We did talk about that a little bit. It wasn't a main focus of conversation, in part because we weren't sure where the money was going to shift from. Also, we're very cognizant of the fact that this is a 10-year plan, but it's really the 2 years are what we really lock in here. And so to the extent that we're locking in the studies, we did think that made sense. And as the studies show results, we can figure out how to implement them in future CIPs.
Okay, thank you. I would always argue that it's a 2 + 2 years, so the 2 years are pretty locked in, but the next 2 years are pretty way more attainable in terms of planning, and we should be setting the stage already. And the little bit more complex question, and feel free not to go into that. I always struggled in the CIP to identify the areas of risk and stratify them properly. We are at a point where we are very close. We get very close to the 10%. We have talked every single iteration. This is my second CIP, is more financially focused because we are just very close to the limits. So is that a conversation that the commission has had?
So we had a similar conversation related to the letter that you received from the Economic Development Commission, generally on the risks in the CIP. I think we were somewhat more allayed by the fact that the places where we come close to the limits are not in these next 2 years. So there is a little bit of time to adjust before we would really hit the limits.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Matt?
Thank you, Chair Garvey. And so a question for you, Ms. Burgess, is you mentioned mobile. One of your recommendations is a mobile resilience center. And is that based on discussion, studies, articles that folks have seen? I'm intrigued by it. I just wanted to see what led to that, because it's the same amount of money, but it seems like it would be a pretty significantly different concept than the Lubber Run Resiliency Hub that is in the proposed CIP.
And I think it need not be fundamentally different. It may be that all of this lives at Lubber Run, but the thought was just, for example, if you're buying batteries that are attached to the wall and that have to stay at Lubber Run, versus buying batteries that are charged at Lubber Run and live at Lubber Run, but can be made mobile in case, if there were a tornado on the north side of the county and it made more sense for a resiliency center to be set up in Madison Community Center or at the Gunston Community Center, and places that aren't, it's very possible that we have a natural disaster or other emergency that affects a part of the county that's not near Lubber Run. And it would make more sense to be able to move the infrastructure, the things that help over to where the problem is, instead of expecting everyone to come to Lubber Run. We are also cognizant of the fact that Lubber Run is in a stream bed. And so if there is, for example, a flooding issue, Lubber Run might be cut off.
Sure. Okay. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions for Ms. Burgess? Thank you so very much. And if you want to stay tuned, you'll hear, we're going to be addressing some of your recommendations and things, I think, and a number of the issues that we talk about, so you might want to stay tuned. But I think what we'll do now is we've had a number of sort of proposed changes and tweaks, if you will, and I thought we would move into that, colleagues, if this is a good time to do that. Okay. And I'll just go through, I've got a list here of the issues that I think have come up, and we'll just kind of work through them if that's all right. And we'll start off actually with Lubber Run. And I think the major issue here of interest that I've heard, we have not discussed the mobile aspect of it, but is shifting the funding source away from the Climate Action Fund, and I think to use some of the $3 million unallocated pay-go to accomplish the same thing. Am I framing that correctly? Has somebody else got a different idea? See sort of head nods. Anything else, Matt? You have some?
Sure. I think that it's most appropriate that the 1.2 million for the backup be from PAYGO rather than from the Climate Action Fund. So I'd be supportive of that. I do have a question, and I think there's a policy area for potential discussion. And that question is, with respect to Lubber Run, did we do, if I'm reading the page right, we can do 4 days of backup at Lubber Run on a low power basis. but I know that you as Chair, Libby, have expressed concerns about a longer power outage for sure. And so am I reading that right? Is it 4 days that we could do? I'm sorry to, there's 8 hours and 4 days referred to on that page. And I'm wondering if I'm reading that right. Sorry not to sort of surface this question a little bit sooner.
I'll start, and then I'll let DES come and answer, but our intent was, it was all about what is the, quote, problem we're trying to solve? Like, what are we, and I think our view on resiliency, and I'm sure we can have a conversation, was a central location where if there was an extended power outage, where people needed to come and stay, right, or they had medical equipment or like that, truly about life safety. So while the primary backup for Lubber Run is really intended to be the battery electric that we have there, this additional battery electric, which DES can explain, is sizable. It will take up several parking spaces. We need to figure out where to locate that, assuming we put it in the garage or whatever. There's still work to be done there. But that it would support peak demand, so of the facility for 8 hours, right? So it's operating just like it is now with no disruption. Now, if you start ratcheting down, do you know what I mean? So not all the lights are on and making, but you know what I mean, at different levels, then the battery electric does 4 days. But if we want it operational at peak load, and Greg and Mike chime in like it is, then that's where you need that backup natural gas generator, that level. That was our thinking, is again about what is the problem we're trying to solve. Now, we have included in this proposal, and I know Dipscom is also looking at expanding this, there are 3 mobile solar generators that we are going to be able to, move around. What that's going to do is cell phones. Like, that is not going to be, whatever, right? You're not charging your vehicle there. It's not that kind of thing, and it's not providing shelter in a case of emergency. So that was our thinking, and maybe you all are in a different place. I understand that, but that was the genesis for this proposal. And Lubber Run, I think, was just because it is centrally located and a new facility that already had battery electric. So when we talk about some of our older facilities, that retrofit, what does that mean, is where we were just trying to get to action, to be honest. We think, trying to work it through, plan that out could take longer. And I think what we've heard is you all want us to move to have something given what we've seen with these extreme weather events. So that was, again, that was our intent, and I think hopefully a good, recognizes a good intent.
One more question is, it's my understanding there's also going to be solar arrays so that those batteries on Lubber Run could recharge some from the solar. Might not be I see Mike shaking. So then you would, if it's like really bright sunny weather, you could go longer, right? Because the batteries would charge. I see. All right, maybe it's time to turn it over to Greg. Is that beyond me? Okay, yeah, Greg.
I think Michelle covered it well. I would simply add that at the risk of saying the obvious, the load demands in a facility are going to vary greatly over time. On a day like today, the demand is pretty high for cooling. We could have a really cold day in winter where the demand for heating is high, and that's where your peak energy demands are going to come on. So if we're going to cover a broad range of resilient scenarios, we want to, plan for that broad range of power needs. So, I mean, if it falls in spring or fall and the heating and cooling loads are pretty light, the batteries will run us longer. In the depths of winter or the, day like today, it's not going to last us very long.
Yeah. So on resiliency, I'm thinking, I have limited scope, so I'm thinking Katrina and the inside of the Superdome. And so is the low power enough for 4 days? I mean, I don't think you need the full facility lit up and working, but I do think you'd want air conditioning if it's super hot or heat if it's super cold. And so is our goal with resiliency covered by the low 4 days or not? Or is that not a question that we know for sure?
The longer runtime of 4 days would be for emergency systems. That's just lighting and the basics, keeping the facility safe for occupancy, but it wouldn't control the climate in the building. So
maybe that's not quite, I mean, that was the problem in the Superdome, if I recall, is that it wasn't, climate controlled, and inside it, we saw pictures that were deeply concerning. So we're not, 4 days is maybe safety from, but not everything that we would want. Is that?
Right, it'd just be basic life safety, keeping the emergency exits on, and some low level of emergency lighting on and things like that.
Great.
So, yeah, we want to have a range of flexibility, which is why we go to that deeper resilience.
It's really helpful. I'm just trying to get my head around this. I'll yield.
No, I will just say, I'm really pleased that this discussion's come up, and I'm hopeful the next CIP, I won't be here. You may have a whole issue on resiliency and start really figuring out and calibrating what it is that's a good idea to have and what we can do. But I think this is just sort of a baby step, but I'm glad we're taking it. I don't know who is next. I'll go to Maureen.
Yeah.
Well, I had, I guess, a little bit of a continued, deeper, specific question. The 4 days for like basic life safety, does that include potentially electricity for people's like medical equipment, like respirators or other oxygen, basic things that like cannot really be turned off, but we may not be able to power otherwise?
Adam can maybe help me out here, but I don't think we've modeled it to that level in terms of how many, respirators or things like that. To the extent that those are low power using, then I think you could probably handle a certain load. But anything, again, that starts to suck a bunch of power, it's a different game. You can pull that, Adam, if you need.
Yeah, so the general idea is it's a lot of low usage equipment. The average is give or take around 10 to 15 kilowatts per hour over that 4-day period. So again, your mobile device, a very low consumption piece of equipment would be able to be charged, but that would be about it. And then again, general facility, protection, but not climate control, as Greg mentioned.
Gotcha.
And if I can, I think most of those devices come with a battery pack that's at least 15 hours, is that correct? So that people would have at least that if the power goes out, but then more than that, where they're in trouble.
Most of those devices typically do, yes.
Okay. All right, great. I think we're set there. We could talk about this for a long time. Takis.
Yeah, so last fall I had the opportunity to go to our sister city, Aachen, and they have a resiliency hub. It's in their hospital. They have a huge university hospital, and it has a 4-story basement, and it's all a resiliency place. So the idea is to have multi-layered resiliency layers. The hospital was renovated to have different circuits for different moments. Their winter is also longer. They were not very worried about keeping the hospital for a week or so warm because, the number of people in there keeps the hospital warm by itself. They had the problem to keep it cool. That's a different story. What I got from there is 2 things. Number one is they said that all their resiliency technology was also good for use in the daily life. So it has a resiliency aspect to that. So it works when the fuel and other things are not there. But at the same time, it fulfills other tasks as well. And the one thing that they showed me, and they showed off, is they had 3 backup generators, giant backup generators. They weren't diesel. They were flywheel kinetic energy storage devices. So this is basically, these are, big as a room, a big room actually, with, tons of a flywheel, very, very heavy, that is, powered when they have, and then it can go for a week or so. It's in vacuum, and it goes. It was bought from an Israeli company, RevTerra is the name, and they said, look, during the day, this thing works also as to balance the grid. If we have a peak, for example, we don't need to power on a additional generator or something, or an additional turbine in a coal-powered power plant. We can serve it from here, and then we recover very, very fast. So the way they have a giant technical university there, so they were really interested in the technology. But this is just to make the case that diesel is also very vulnerable, like natural gas as well. So there are newer technologies that are coming, and especially in this world of constant conflict and constant disruption of essential systems. Every day we see how civilian infrastructure is bombed and put out of commission all over the world, actually. So there's new thinking about resiliency that also works. It's not only putting a lot of money in doing something that only will kick in the moment that we need it in 1% of its life, but it's actually usable during normal operations, and it's a good thing. I just want to think that before we decide what to put there, what is appropriate, et cetera, that we go around and say, okay, what's available? What would be available, attainable, serviceable? I understand all the above, right?
Okay, thank you. I think, fascinating, when you guys have a work session on this, I'm going to sit out there and listen. But for the moment, with this CIP, I believe we're okay with shifting those funds out of the Climate Act, because I think people were uncomfortable with that.
For sure.
Okay, and I think we're okay. Staff can do a double check that the, gas generator, I think there are a number of reasons that makes the most sense to do something quickly and now. I'm assuming that we're okay to move forward with that.
Madam Chair?
Right? Yes.
I'm not trying to be trouble,
sure.
and I am late to this issue, later than I want to be. But I would, I guess a question, did we do any studies to know if we will have the likelihood that we would have Houston has a massively long power outage right now. When I lived in Houston, they always had this. Alexandria has flooding. We have flooding at 4 Mile Run. We don't. We have a ton of flooding that is micro flooding, but we do not have Houston's flooding systemically. Did we do any studying, and it's totally fine if we didn't, to know an assessment of the likelihood, kind of like 100-year floods, of whether we would have a power outage of longer than 2, 3, 4 days? To my knowledge, it has not happened in Arlington in the last 50 or 100 years, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't happen in the future.
Yeah.
But
I'm trying to remember the name of the hurricane.
Isabel.
1972?
No.
Yeah.
1996.
6 or 7 or, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and
I went
it
to
was
Paris.
extended. It was during the summer. It was 3 or 4 days, I think.
It was rough.
Yeah.
So it has happened.
Yeah.
But so we're not planning for figuring out how to power the county during such an event. And I think that we spent a lot of time, I know Libby did, and I think Takis did. We also spent some time at COG this year doing some tabletop exercises. That's a situation with a community-wide resiliency where, it's unfortunate, but there really is not an obvious solution in place.
Got it. So for my part, I do want to study and see if we have an alternative to gas. I know that diesel is the process now, and I don't think the technology is currently there, but at least that would be and that doesn't mean I have language at this moment, and I'm mindful of finalizing, and I'm mindful that I'm late, but I do feel as though it happened once, and it could happen again, and it could happen more frequently, but that's at least my view, and I wanted to at least state that.
Yeah, so I'm going to try, and staff can correct me if my limited understanding is of the generators that you want to be able to kick on and work well. It's really limited. You've got diesel, propane, gas. Gas is great because it comes out of the ground. It's likely to keep going. The flywheel and things, that sounds really cool. I think there's some really great things to do. But as Mark, as we've sort of surfaced here, we haven't had a power outage more than 4 or 5 days, but we have had that, and you never know what's going to happen, right? So I think there was an effort to try to be ready as quickly as we can, as well as we can. And that, I think, is hence the gas thing now. I think past that, yes, but I think if we do studies and whatever, we're not going to have anything in place for a while, and I don't know that a power outage or an emergency is going to wait for us to do all of those studies. So that, I think that was part of it, was to move quickly on that, but I think all of these are important points down the line, and that's why I was talking about when you have a sort of a work session in the future, there's just a whole lot to think about, but I think to move quickly with what we've got, I really think it's probably gas is really what's the most secure and the most available, and staff could correct me if I'm wrong, but.
I don't have any doubt. The question is, when does that construction occur? When does that, and I think Ms. Cowan may have answered, when does the construction for the generator have to occur to provide that backup?
Well, we're trying just to move as quickly as we can and recognizing the supply chain, or not to blame the supply chain, but it takes time to order these things, to place the order and get them delivered. I mean, a study I understand the rationale for the request. There are trade-offs. Space is constrained at Lover Run significantly. And those trade-offs of, are you taking up the entirety of the, not the entirety, but half of the garage? Are you taking up outdoor space? Are you taking up, I think those are big things that would be trade-offs, I think, that you would want to consider, as well as what Taka's mentioned about attainability, serviceability, all those things, so that we are ready, is what I would say. So we don't, our timeline is to get this moving on 25 and 26. And it was, again, with the intent of, like, let's move, we thought that there was a desire to get this in place.
Within the next 2 years for sure, and maybe within the next 6 months. I don't want to pin down, but I do, a sense could be helpful.
Well, it's coming to the board at the July meeting, our purchase power arrangement with putting solar panels on Lover Run, and the engineering, Adam can speak to it, but, Adam was in our conference room about 3 months ago, and we said, you got to get this done as quickly as you can. That's our direction that we heard from you. And so the choice for natural gas, I think, was meant to address one of the things we experienced during Isabel, which is that, the natural gas lines continue to function, whereas the electric lines did not. It is a carbon-based fuel. There is no debating that.
Sure.
There is no reliable alternative that could provide that kind of boost. If there is, in the next 6 months or a year, we will be the first to come back to you and say, let's switch it out. And I don't think that, and Adam can speak to this, the way we're going to engineer it, it's the generator itself. If there's a better way to put a generator in there, we'd switch it out with an alternative source. Absolutely. And so I don't think that we need to slow down, but we need to make sure that whatever we build has pieces that can be replaced by non-carbon-based sources.
Yeah, I'm not at all advocating slowing down. I'm trying to understand when that time decision point, I think the chances that would be switched would be nearly zero. But that's the question that I'm asking, and it's certainly within the next 2 years. And what we talked about at the last meeting was focused on the solar piece of that, which we all unanimously, we didn't at that time, to my recollection, talk about the gas piece of it. It is my fault for not raising these issues earlier, but the question for me is, I know you would come to us if this was the case. Is there any support, or is it appropriate to, if it takes 6 months or 9 months for the board to say, please come back to us at the end of that period to confirm that gas is still the right way to go? But that's the question. I'm late to raising these issues, but I did want to raise them. Thank you.
I think you're thinking.
Well, no, I'm just thinking
No, thinking is allowed.
Michelle
It's
will know
good.
better than I would, which is that we'll have to award a contract of some kind, and I don't know,
I don't have a precise, I don't have a precise timeline, right? I just don't right now. Sorry.
It's likely, though it's not certain. Well, I mean, we would bring that in front of the board for an award of a contract, depending on the costs associated with it, so. And we'd let you, you know me, I'll let you know anyway.
Yeah.
If it's going to come, to your point, we don't have to have timing, but if this is an item that would come to the board anyway, then that seems to me to answer all the questions, and I think it does.
I don't know that the purchase, I'm not sure it does. It's not a construction contract. We're just acquiring a generator, so.
Got
yeah.
it. Okay.
Well, I think staff now knows that once you do it, let us know and talk to the board. Yeah. Yeah, which you always do. Yeah. Susan, thank you.
I think there's a whole tangle of questions that are wrapped up in here, so I'm going to make an attempt to tease them out, which I may fail at. So please, somebody
Okay, we're
throw
still
me a
on Lover
line.
Run.
Still on Lover Run Resilience Hub. One is, I think you're hearing from the board an interest in refreshing our understanding, our community's understanding about our emergency planning assets and capabilities. For example, for the loss of power for 1 to 2 weeks, what happens? And I know we've been working on that with COG, but maybe sometime in the next quarter to tag that as an item, as an information item, and potentially a work plan for the next couple of years to move forward on that with schools, which I assume is one of our shelter locations, and they do have some generators and that sort of thing. But just to refresh people's understanding, I would like to ask us to consider that. maybe subsidiary to that is if there are likely capital improvements needed to support that, should we have an out-year placeholder in this CIP or, $1 to remind us to ask the question? I don't think it's it's not urgent because it's not the next 2 years necessarily, but you could imagine that there is some refresh of either the technology or the extent of those emergency planning assets in the future. And then the final piece, I think, is really the question of technology innovation around backup generators. I think that has what has come out here. I think if I'm hearing correctly, DES's assessment is that we're not there yet and that we want to move forward quickly at Lever Run, which I would support. And so I think that probably remains a natural gas generator for the near term, but maybe a third piece here is, might we consider an RFI or some sort of invitation for technology innovation to understand what may be possible? And again, the timing of that can be a bit flexible, but is that in the next 6 months or the next 2 years or something to the effect? For the question of today and the CIP, I think there's two. One is, do you need any more dollars to get Lever Run done? And two is, do you need a placeholder recognizing that the needs for emergency response and resilience are likely to continue to advance and intensify? Do we need to put a placeholder in an out year for that work?
Thank you. I am going to make a wild guess that it's going to be hard to do a placeholder when you don't know what you're holding, what it is, but I'll let the manager.
Well, yeah, I'm going to try to break down and try to deal with the first one on emergency planning. And I think that the chair has been in conversations with our Department of Public Safety, Communications and Emergency Management, especially around September when it's emergency preparedness. We have this conversation each year, and each year the conversation gets a little bit easier, but I cannot sit here and tell the residents of Arlington County that there is a solution that would provide backup power to all our residents for an extended period of time. It just isn't something right now that's technologically feasible. And I think that I would encourage the chair or vice chair to comment, since they were at COG. There's, without stating way too much that's obvious about it, which is that we were told sometimes by our infrastructure providers that if we lost a big piece of our infrastructure, we needed, quote, to figure out what to do while they took a few months to rebuild it. And so I don't think that's actually a viable emergency plan. And so, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we've come up with one that's going to figure that out. Usually in these situations where there's been power outages for small areas as opposed to a large area, we then rely on our friends from the rest of the state to come here and provide us with equipment and services. That is really our emergency plan at the moment. I'm hoping technology will get it better, I think that the chair and vice chair have given a lot more thought to this recently than I have, so they might want to add to that.
I don't think not add too much. I think it is a big gap. Part of the reason I've been pushing, I think I've talked everybody's ear off about this little small solar thing I've set up for my mom, and looking at ordering solar. I tell everybody who's got solar panels on their roof, make sure you've got a battery so that when the power goes out, you can actually access it. And I actually think to be resilient, it really is not so much. The government's got some things they can do, but individual residents, we need to support and encourage them to do this. And I believe we're going to be, I hope, rolling out fairly soon a bit of a kind of a plan or project for the community. I think we're going to call it Empower Arlington, possibly, to really encourage and support people to get solar and get more solar. And actually, I will tell you, it is sort of working, because my daughter had something float across her email, and she said, "Mom, this looks like a really good idea, and we're going to sign on it. We're going to do it." And they did make it really easy. So I think there are things like that we can do. But the fact is, when it comes to real resiliency in a community, it's up to individuals, which is, as I do my little spiel every time, that people need to think about it. Think about a 2-week camping trip at home and what you're going to do. So I think these are all really good points. I do think the out-year placeholder, what I was saying is I think in your next CIP, I won't be here. I would not be surprised if there's even a whole section on resiliency that you'll look at. But I think now is probably not the time to try to even put that in there. We're having this discussion. People are talking about it. For the moment, I think it makes most sense, if people are all right with it, we'll move forward with what the manager's recommendation here is, simply changing that source of the funds out of the Climate Action Fund. Appreciate the concern about using natural gas at all, but I think a lot more sort of study needs to go before we can move forward, and it's going to be it'll be a long process. It's going to be a lot of discussion, a lot of talking about it. This is what we know now, and I think we should do that for these next 2 years, and then spend the next 2 years thinking about what you want to do after that. Does that make sense? Is that all right? People all right?
That's fine.
Okay. All right, thank you. I will come next 2 years. I'm going to sit out there and listen to what you guys are doing. Yeah, get me a special chair. Yeah. I'll have a little battery-operated fan. I'll sit back there. All right, I think that brings us to another issue we've talked about quite a bit is the South Carolina Springs Road. We were looking at adding money because what we really want to do is speed up the sidewalk expansion project, and there's a lot of easements that need to be done. I think as a group, we're sort of comfortable with up to $1 million to try to get these easements moved along faster and possibly moving this faster. I welcome comments from colleagues. I'm not quite sure we're going to have the whole $1 million by the time we go through things, because we've got that, the unallocated pay-go is, as I understand, is it exactly $3 million actually? How much is that? It's exactly $3 million, okay. So we've already moved the money for the, it was 1.2, so we're getting lower and lower. But I think a good chunk of money for Carolina Springs Road for those easements, I don't know how much we're going to be able to spend because it takes a while legally to make that happen. I welcome any comments or discussion on that. Matt?
Thank you. I guess I would love to see if we could, keeping in mind the other items that are there, if we could commit to 500,000 and then 500,000 to 1 million, do the up to piece of it. To colleagues' credit and also to staff's credit, we have, I think that we have some work to do to communicate all of the work that our staff have done. And this is difficult because communicating, you don't want to overpromise, and there are easements involved, which is real property, and so that's tricky. But I just think that 500,000, committing to that would be that insurance that we are really in a different place than we were a year ago, which is true, and we have a little bit of work to do to communicate how different of a place that we are in. So that's what I see. Once we're at the end, we could know better, but that way we have room for the other money, but we are also saying emphatically that this is a big priority. We've heard it, all of us have heard it, and I think there's consensus. So that's the thought.
Thank you. That makes sense to me at this point, about 500,000 to just sort of make sure that we can really move ahead of that. Susan?
I mean, I think we're all extremely committed to moving as swiftly as possible on the Carolina Springs renovations. I think we had briefings, and we'll continue to do that with the community about the intensity of easements, and some of them are really tough ones. So I appreciate the spirit of the effort, and I think that the board, at least today, is 100% aligned on supporting staff and the community moving forward quickly on this. I don't feel the need to box it in specifically for this for this upcoming period. I have not seen a millisecond in the last 6 months where we didn't all agree that we would move as swiftly as possible. So I trust that we will continue to do that, and I know that it's a delicate balance with the CIP to make sure we maintain flexibility throughout. For me, that's sufficient, and the up to language would be sufficient.
Okay, so you're interested in putting up to language, not committing a set amount. Okay, all right, I've got right now a placeholder, Matt, if that will. Mr. D, let's keep going and see where we are.
I do have a separate question on this.
Yep, go.
And want to be efficient with time.
Yep.
Do I have a head nod sort of, now is not, I could envision saying, can you help say more about the community is watching the CIP, but I feel like we need a venue for communicating the work that you've already done. And so is there, Mr. Manager or Way or whoever, without promising, without getting into things that, is there a plan for that? And I don't want to, you guys know better the material, and so that's a separate question from this that we'll get to at the end.
Yeah, Ms. Wong.
You're on. That's
Yes,
good.
yes, we do plan to engage the community, and we want to communicate the different layers of project we're going on. We have the broader corridor study, which is scheduled for later, and then we have the different phase. The immediate phase would be the signal upgrade, which, one of the pole the signal is hanging on has been damaged. We consider that as not a significant, but a slight risk on safety, which we are going to address immediately. I actually like to thank the neighbor who's, living right next to it. They actually agreed on giving us temporary and permanent easement to allow us to relocate that pole now. So there's the importance of communicating with the community, because I don't want people see that and say, that's all you're doing for us? That's it? No, that's not it. There are different layers coming after, all the way from upgrade the 5th Street intersection, which is a offset intersection with 3 legs of streets. And that would have about a block or 2 involved. And then extending that into phase 2, which is all the way from 3rd to 6th. So we want to be able to explain to the community and also get their feedback, get their input. There are things that we may move faster, such as the signal safety-related things, and then there are things we want to take time to hear from them. So you are correct about this will be a full engaged process.
Yeah.
Thank you. There's phase 1 and phase 2, which are things that the community is going to learn about in the short term. There's also a consent agenda item on Monday about this. And so I just think it's important to be sticky and detailed enough about the work that all of you have done, and then the board has coalesced in listening to the community. Thank you, Chair.
I think it's a good point. I think in a way, we all, I think, had a very good briefing about the whole of the plan, and perhaps there's a way to share that briefing and kind of do a briefing for our community. So we won't, in our CIP work session, try to design a community briefing for you, but I think there's a real interest in doing that, so thank you. Thank you so much. That's great. Okay, good. Anything more on this issue? Takis.
Madam Chair, so what the challenge that the CIP discussion has revealed is that, yes, there are issues, that there are actions that are right now underway. That's 3rd Street, that will be 5th Road, and some improvements around that. But at the same time, we've seen the timeline, which puts the study still relatively late, the master transportation plan coming first, et cetera. And we heard even from the Fiscal Affairs Advisory Commission that we need to compress that a little bit. And I do think that, and in the just aforementioned presentation and briefing to us, we saw the challenges of the easements that we have to acquire there. This is nothing new to your department, because you have similar problems in other corridors, like on Columbia Pike, for example, right? So therefore, I think that committing and putting the fiscal elasticity there of $1 million is a better investment, because we will be more nimble in being able to act at the same time that we are actually working on 2 major intersections, and they are very close to the most challenging easement locations. And that helps us also to set the stage for a better treatment of Carlin Springs in the master transportation plan, a more intentional treatment of South Carlin Springs in the master transportation plan, and then in the study. I would also venture to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if we have the firepower here now there, we can contemplate compressing the process so that we get to results earlier, and not post 27.
So I take your question is, are we considering the option of narrowing the traveled way?
That under the master transportation plan. The question is whether we should be appropriating the money now, the up to $1 million, to make it easier for you to say, okay, if we need an easement, we will need it anywhere. Some variation of this easement that we'll need it anywhere. We can, use an opportunity today, and we know that we have the backing of the CIP to do that.
I will say the type of scenario that you're talking about, including significantly narrowing, for example, the traveled way, or adding, or basically trading the current use of right-of-way for, other purpose, other modes, all that will definitely need to be studied in the corridor study. And we have talked about this, a corridor study like that, we would really want that to be guided by the updated MTP, the Master Transportation Plan, because we have seen the challenge of our Master Transportation Plan being developed mode by mode in pieces, and all of them claim this is your top priority, and when you put them together, you have 4 top priorities together. And then it become a debate of who gets the top of the top. So we're trying to solve that. I actually happened to have a meeting with my staff just this afternoon. It is a pretty, I will say, ambitious goal, but I think we need to deal with it, because otherwise we come to each location, each intersection, having that argument over and over. So we hope that MTP will then be able to guide Carlin Springs. And when it comes to significantly change the road configuration, we have to consider the impact on network roads. For example, if people are not able to, if not 27,000 vehicles able to come down South Carlin Springs, then where do they go? So that will require some modeling, some larger scope. Those things will be handled in both the MTP and the South Carolina Springs Road study. I think you have a question about would it be helpful to have some funding allocated in there? I always welcome funding, but I will say it will be very difficult for us to give you an accurate prediction, or not accurate, sort of a reasonable prediction like how much I may need. Based on that, I would rather not, do the guesstimate and come back to you when we have more adequate information. Luckily or unluckily, CIP is every 2-year cycle. So I believe we will have more information in the upcoming cycles and come to you for support.
Yeah. So, and Mr. Carantonis, we have, I think, suggested at least 0.5 million, and then I will remind everyone what we're working with here, at least as far as I know, is $3 million, and we have a number of items. So there's a limit to how much we can actually do without making things really difficult. So I think $1 million might be a little tricky, but I understand your inclination to do that.
I am open to discuss every variation of that. I just want to. The community there is asking us for action, not now, but for basically a decade now, right? So it's not like this popped up somehow. It matured, and I know that we are under a very logical, and to me at least, logical and acceptable pressure to provide solutions that are durable and that fix the underlying problems. And I commend you because we made a lot of progress. We need to acknowledge that. But still the core of the problems there in that section of the street, of the road are there. So I'm fine to agree with colleagues to be a little bit more cautious in that, knowing that, the money will be still there if we find that it's needed. But I wanted to just set a stage for a more nimble response to that, including with a more targeted work on South Carolina Springs during the MTP.
Well, thank you. I think actually if we can take Matt's suggestion and come up with sort of a community briefing from what we have been informed, I think they might be surprised at how much, because there really is a lot there. And I think that will help too, getting people a little bit more information about what the plan is. And actually a lot of it's moving along pretty quickly. So
yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Cunningham, did you?
I was just going to associate myself with that same comment. Like if we could schedule maybe for September a county manager report to share with the community. I think it will also be an apt time because we'll be right at the beginning of back to school. And I know that we are all excited that the speeding cameras in school zones, particularly along Carlin Springs, will be on and coming at that point. So, to remind folks that you should go ahead and start slowing down now so that you don't get one of those fun things in the mail. But I think we are really pushing forward on a number of things, and September or October would be a great time to celebrate that. And I would also just remind us that the construction pieces, the big dollars, would tend to come after the easement and the design pieces, which are all a project right now. And once we get to 27, we've got BEB buses and other things. The dollars would come back out, I think. So I am not at all concerned. We will not be able to find the dollars to do as swiftly, as quickly everything we can, and appreciate your leadership in making sure we know everything we can and what we need to do to get there.
Thank you. All right, I think we're ready to move on to the item that we heard the most about. And thank you very much, Ms. Wong, and really appreciate the work, and more to come. Madison Community Center, we have heard a lot about that from folks. And I think we all agree there needs to be some work there. What we're trying to figure out is exactly how to get started on it, because there are a lot of things involved. And at this moment, I think we're looking at $250,000 to $500,000 in planning money that'll sort of figure out exactly what we want to have go into there and what kind of phasing. And I think we will have some discussion, and it's quite possible, I know a number of us have talked about, is there something we can do really quickly, like upgrade the machines or get some functioning machines in there, and that even could come out of, if it's not in here, that could come out of, operating funds in next year's budget, if that's what rises to the top. So there are other ways to sort of fund that small amount, but I think we're looking at between $250,000 and $500,000 or so in this CIP for planning on the Madison Community Center. I think that's sort of where we are, and I welcome comments, suggestions, thoughts. Mr. DeFranti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Often I'm willing to speak before knowing everything, and staff, as Ms. Cunningham and staff, know more about the detailed thinking on this. I kind of started with the big picture, but there's planning, and then there's, Ms. Chair Garvey alluded to the I think it's DPR, and not DES, that would be the small things that could be done probably within budget. But I guess I feel like the right thing to do is sort of, and maybe Ms. Cunningham, but to see if staff might describe a little bit of the planning that would occur. There are issues out there, I think, that you, Mr. Schwartz, have identified,
Well, let me start a little, and this has actually been, in some sort of maybe strange way, a lot of fun over the last couple of weeks. So we talked about this at one of the work sessions, and I went back and I looked at the first letter we got from, I think it was from the old Glebe Civic Association, that was talking about, we do have, Richard went out and did a field trip, took some shots of all the weight rooms there. There's some really nice new equipment, but it's in the basement, so they're concerned it might flood. There's windows that haven't been replaced in 70 years. There's lots of different pieces there, and so the question is, should we just spruce it up a little bit and call it a day? Should we be a little bit more into it and do a lot more? And then Greg and Adam and folks are talking about how, if we have to do the HVAC, we might have to shut down the building, and I had a heart attack when they told me that. So now we're talking a little bit about maybe doing a phased renovation, but how much? And then we can get into the other questions, which I know we've had conversations with you about, which is this an opportunity to think more broadly, not necessarily about the footprint of the building, because it runs into some Civil War protected areas and sort of parking, but maybe it's a place where we can incorporate some elements from nearby nature center or do a broader conversation. So I will tell you right now, unless Michelle wants to disagree with me, I don't have an answer. I just know there's a lot of options out there, and I actually want to thank the community and board members and staff for this has been, and I really mean it sincerely, it's been an interesting conversation. It's just really hard to figure out what it is we want to do. So with that, I'm going to pause, and I'm going to let board members weigh in about what they want to do.
But I'm going to ask you a question first. I believe the HVAC and the roof really need to be done.
Yeah, we have to.
And that's in there, right?
We have to do the roof. I'm going to let Michelle can talk about that.
So let's get level set what we're doing. What's the base, and then we're talking about on addition.
Yeah, we spent a lot more time on that over the last 48 hours last week. And yes, I think I had some hopes that we could do the roof and hold off on the HVAC, but in further exploration, because of the integration with the chillers and all of those things, and the not failing yet, but the reliability of parts, do you follow me, that we could be in a situation like we are now facing in Central. And so how long do we defer that? And then related to that, because so many of the window unit, the cooling is window units, and they're single pane glasses, we're going to get you some information that this is one of our least energy efficient kind of bleeding, so it makes sense to make those, I think, investments now. I think the question is to exactly what Mark said, then how do we phase that work so we're not having a full building closure? And then we are asking ourselves, to give you all options, this is to give you options, that to the degree we are doing some of that work that is disruptive to the center, is there anything that we can do, and what are the options for what does that look like from a cost perspective and a time perspective? So we can come back to you and say, all right, we're closing the center, we're going to upgrade the HVAC, but we might also be able to do X, Y, and Z in terms of making the facility a little better, just for your consideration within the existing footprint, if that makes sense. Now, that will not be necessarily cheap. It depends on the scope of that work, and I think we'd want to talk to the community about that, but that could be, $5 to $10 million or even more, depending on if we try to really make the multipurpose room into a true gymnasium that's more accessible to youth up there, that kind of thing. But those are options that we should explore and bring back to you. I also think at the same time, to the degree, and we want to hear from you, like a complete revisioning, a tear down of that building and what that looks like. I think we can try to walk through some of the practical constraints of, with the Civil War ramparts right there, with the tree lines, what is really feasible from a true visioning perspective, and then constraints on parking, just to help feed into that. So as we have conversations with the community, right, that it's informed by a little bit of, of that, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. How much do you need to be doing that kind of planning? Because I think that's what we want to make sure is available, so this really moves along.
Gosh, we never know.
Well, I'm going to say we need, Ryan, raise your hand. I made you do it last time. He's the guy who's doing all these studies. He needs a buddy.
Okay, and we're going to
He's
get,
a
that's at the end of the list, but we could maybe go to that.
No, but I'm saying that's an important part of
Yes,
this.
yeah.
I think it's hard for us to know, but I think starting with 250 is a good place to be. And then as we always, when we're originally developing these scopes, we can come back to a close order. We say, oh, well, we'll do this, or we'll cover it with an operating budget. So I think that's.
Yep, so that's a reasonable sort of baseline. That's very, very helpful. And we will be talking about your buddy again later, so we're, yes, all right, good. Thank you. Ms. Cunningham.
I just want to reiterate that the goal here is not necessarily to dump a ton of extra money in. It's really to step back and understand the connections and the trade-offs. And so the roof is not leaking yet, knock on wood. Oh, maybe it is. Okay, so the question is, so I think that's the balance, is how much do we absolutely have to go forward? And given that is imminent, which is, a bigger question about, how do we do this long-range planning? But I think it warrants, if we haven't touched it in 76 years, roughly, there's some stuff we've done, but if we're doing a big touch now, can we make sure that we're doing a touch that is supportive of the medium-term needs and really moves us there faster? So the question of what are the constraints, which I think there are many, and not all of them financial, but some of them actually built environment and Civil War and other pieces. And then what are the possibilities and the priorities? I'd love to see us do a very high-level, quick community conversation about that. And I think we have some examples where we've done that well in other places before we lock in on the changes that are clearly needed to maintain the building in the near term. So, and I do think that at least asking the question about Gulf Branch, which is a really, like Long Branch, a challenging location for a public building in today's world, and then also looking at Old Glebe Park and just, are we getting the maximum value for near term, long term? And we can't be perfect in knowing everything about that, but if we can at least give ourselves the space and the staff to ask those questions and think about it, I think it will be very supportive.
Thank you. Mr. DiFranti.
Along those lines, three thoughts. The first is, thank you, Ms. Cowan. We've now, and the chair, we've now got a sense of the cost that we're looking at 250. The second question, and I am agnostic on the answer to this, is between now and I'm not trying to create more work, but between now and adoption next week, really, I think subject matter expert would be you guys, Ms. Cowan, and then the team would be, is it helpful or not helpful to have 2 or 3 sentences describing some of this? And I think we should, but I'm not wedded to it. So that's, and they could reflect what you just said, Ms. Cunningham. The other thought that I have is that we need to say loud and clear. First, there's 4.7, I think, million already in this. Second, we heard you. We all sat here and heard you. On the tour that we took, some of the community felt, as I believe, as though they weren't being listened to. And we need to say 4.7 million plus, we're all listening to you right now. And the manager said that. And so that's a second thought. And a third thought, at least from, and I don't know, this may be too detailed, I think that the HVAC and the windows and the roof all need to be worked on. Those walls would probably withstand a World War II bombing. I mean, I think we can fix the building while still having the walls, and that may be what you guys figure out. But what the community said on the tours that I think we all took is we want to refresh and some of the bathrooms, they just need to be improved. And so I don't know whether that fits in the sentences. That may be the result of what you mentioned, Ms. Cunningham, but maybe we can work over the coming week to have helpful sentences that would give us either a sense of timing that's not too restrictive for the work that is the high-level analysis, and sort of what would need to be done. That's just a thought.
Thank you, and I would like to tell you, Mr. DeFranti, and my colleague, I got a little kind of notes here. It says guidance, CIP guidance, and I'm taking little notes about some things we might want to add. I think those words might go very well there, and we can work on those over the next week. Thank you. Next, Mr. Karantonis.
So to frame that from my perspective, so I had the opportunity to visit the building twice, once with community and one on my own. I find that we have a few, first of all, procedural challenges. Number one, I'm really thankful to the manager and staff for bringing actually the 4.5 million, envelope care and restoration budget. This is significant. And I happen to coincide with the staff actually being there and looking at the building, and they explained to me, the actual challenges, right? And also the maintenance personnel on site. So that's whether, regardless of how we phase it, et cetera, this is major work. This will take time, and I think we would spend some money, we should spend some money to have it guided so as to how to preserve the building better. I mean, this has some very interesting aspects. As a building, it was an old school. It still has some of the old, configuration of the school, etc. Some corners of the building look actually very interesting, and I believe that a good architect would help us there to do the best job possible, and upgrading the building. Now, the second part of the challenge is I hear the community saying, okay, these, basement training and fitness rooms are not up to date. The bathrooms are horrible. I mean, they need a change. That I hear very well. What was lingering in the air and we haven't responded to, and I think that it's a matter of conversation, is what is the program that will have to be move into this building? What other programs? Today, the condition of the building today doesn't accommodate too much and cannot accommodate too much. The location is also a little bit further away. I mean, it works very well for the close-by neighborhood, but this kind of public facilities should be able to serve the rest of Arlington as well. I was very happy to see that we installed in front of the building these, EV chargers, etc. That I was very happy to hear people speaking highly about the childcare program that's going on in the building. These are really important things. Now, we need to think strategically what to scale, what to add, what to optimize there on the side of DPR, of the program that we would design the building for. To me, the pathway to fix the building, to make it decent, you want to fix the envelope of the building, the mechanicals of the building, et cetera, is very clear. I agree with the manager that we would rather see a phased, so that we don't close the building for 2 years, but we have a phased approach to that. And I agree with his colleague Cunningham and Mr. DeFerranti to have a conversation with the neighborhood and with the immediately involved constituency, so that everybody knows and manage expectation how this all is going to go. But I really encourage us to think about the same way we did it for La Beran, that we invited good experts, architects, to think about the programs, the same way they did it for Walter Reed, et cetera. I think that this building really deserves that, and it's not just a fixer-upper, it's a significant asset.
Yeah, thank you for helping us begin to scope the planning study. That's great, thank you. Ms. Coffey.
Thank you. I'll try not to spend too much time agreeing with everyone else, but I think, one of the places that I am kind of coming from here is, as we spend pretty substantial capital dollars on the building, we should get something out of that, right? We're putting our funding in. It's an incredible asset to have any kind of community center. And so once we spend that money, we want to make sure that we're getting use out of it and actual utilization. And so I think, I've been really happy to engage with a lot of the neighbors. I've definitely heard expressed less so a desire for that like long-term, the freshest, best version of a community center, and really just like we want something functional. We want something that we can feel, good about working out in, especially given the ongoing, reality of COVID and public health and air circulation when you're working out. And so making sure that we do really those basics, make it usable. I'm glad $250K seems like a reasonable amount, and hopefully that'll get us kind of started on what are the things that get us to where we all want to be, so that we get the utilization out for the money that we're putting in.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll just add my small bit that when we're doing all of this, we also maybe consider making it a Northern Resiliency Center while we're doing that. So just throw that out. All right, that brings us to the next subject, which you all heard from some folks on adult changing stations. And I believe we've gotten a memo from staff with 4 locations that they think could work well to start that will at least to be explored. And I think one that they think probably will work well right away. And I believe we are all interested in moving forward with that. And that, too, I think at this point is mostly an evaluation and perhaps one installation, and we need about $250,000, I think. Is that correct? Maybe I'll just check with staff. I don't know, Ms. Collin, if that's you, because I think you sent that memo.
I think it's largely correct. I'm not sure. We really need the evaluation to figure out I think we've heard the board would at least like to explore one location. We really, because we're talking about retrofitting existing buildings, we just need the time to evaluate it. These are relatively large spaces, as they're 9 feet, and to retrofit any of our existing community centers or central, there'll be trade-offs on program. And so I think that's why we want to look at 4 facilities as an option, and then come back to you with, this is the one that we think likely makes most sense, and just make sure we work through the trade-offs. So, but I think we're on the right path for that.
Yeah, that's great. And about the 250, we'll sort of, again, take care of that, at least you think.
It may or may not take care of construction. We just don't know, and that's what we need to do, because these things require plumbing and space, and, we need to do that analysis. We can't give you a swag, like, per adult changing station room, it costs this much. It will depend on the facility, because it's a retrofit.
Good, and then I will remind folks again, there's closeout, and there are some other ways to find money if we find we need it. Mr. DeFranti, you had your light on, okay. No. Anyone else, any comment on this one anymore? Okay, thank you. I think we're good with that. And then that brings us to the buddy for our staff person, I think that we need. I think we need one more person to help with planning. Did you count up the number of studies and plans we have going on? I've said that I realized I didn't actually numerically count them. There are a lot.
I published some information in the CIP over the next 2 years for facilities alone. It's like 10, ranging from the detention center to space utilization here in Bosman to Lee Center. Now we're talking about adding Madison. Yeah, I have it, thanks. Court, it's like everything, right? So, and I think, Mr. Carantonis, you asked a very thoughtful question about, well, isn't this really an interdepartmental team? Absolutely. So just as an example, when we were talking about the DIPSCOM utilization, we had DIPSCOM police, fire, DES, DTS, all together to talk through it. But you always need a person like Ryan or Adam or Adil who is actually writing down the requirements, talking to the clients, and has the ability and skills to look at floor prints and be able to say, well, hey, because we're talking about retrofitting buildings, you can't do it here because you have an elevator shaft or stairwell, or you need that type of person to help make sure you're coming up with the right plans and working with an interdepartmental team. And given this, what we showed you doesn't even include what we have going on in parks and transportation planning, so it's just a lot. So
It is a lot. Could you give us a number that we need to put in for this position?
I think it depends on, where we hire, and these are not, these are highly skilled positions,
Right.
And so when you look at fully loaded, I think we're talking in the 2 to 250 range by the
Okay.
time you know what I mean, right, where you hire and everything like that.
So another 250, it's round
Yeah,
number?
I think
And
that's
does
good
that-
enough for now.
I'm trying to think about, I'm stuck in the operating.
This is a legitimate capital expense, so, but we would, as time goes on, if there weren't specific projects that we could associate it with, then we move that back over on the operating side. We do that back and forth many times, but it's good to start with this as a capital expense.
So if we put in of the 3 million in PAYGO, if we use 500 or 250?
No, 250 for the
Okay.
staff person. And then we'll see how we're doing on the operating budget. We may want to shift it out to operating anyway.
split it. Sometimes
Or
we
split it, we'll determine that.
All right, thank you. Ms. Cunningham?
And I just want to highlight, I think Madison, among other conversations, helps us remember the importance to keeping all of our departments connected on this planning. And so, I think that page, it's C70 in the CIP for those following along at home. It's a really awesome start. And we do want parks and at least a nod to schools where there's joint use to be included in that. So as we staff up to have a little bit more free minutes in the late hours of the night for our planning team, I'd like us to think about how to do that and also how to communicate it to the community. Because I know that we are doing a lot of great work on Trade Center, for instance, and all the pieces and parts that connect together, but we may not be communicating it as well as we could be. In part because we don't have the staff fully to do that. So just to tag that, I know that's been a 10+ year conversation about how important long-term planning is to our community, and I know we are doing a lot and maybe communicating less of it. So I'd like to be your partner in helping to both do it and communicate it and ensure that we're both DES, DPR, joint use with schools, so that we are one community making good decisions about where to invest and how to get the best use out of our
And I would like to add on that, we've had a conversation with you and other board members. Our proposed CIP, I'm going to be very direct with you about the amount of time we have to pull it together. Usually it's a little bit of a mad dash, the operating budget, and it's a series of, I think, well-done pages, okay? But as far as pulling together the kinds of conversation pieces you're talking about, there is room for us to do that. We have to figure out how to have a better opportunity to describe to the community. For example, we've all had these conversations over the last few months, but we don't invite the community in to hear about, we're having some real hard conversations about what we want to do with community centers, and a place and a forum to do that publicly, which is what we're starting to do here, would be very helpful.
And I'd also just like to tag that a little different than the emergency planning piece where you really need to do a lot of it on your own. I think there is sometimes incredible enthusiasm and skill across the community of interest in envisioning a future, even when we're not quite ready or not quite staffed to do all of it. So I would just invite both our community members and our staff and board to think about how can we channel that, and in particular in other communities, there are often, private philanthropic efforts that hold some funds to support those sorts of things. And I hear some of them bubbling around public schools, around arts, around parks. And so maybe a challenge to this board for the next couple of years is how can we help funnel that so that those energies are productive rather than getting in the way. And I'm looking forward to working with you all on that. But I'm excited to hear the county manager's continued commitment to this work.
Thank you. I think one of the challenges is getting to be, we do so much and communicating it so that it doesn't overwhelm people. It's kind of, it really is an art to kind of manage the whole thing. Mr. Carantonis, did you have something?
I just wanted to be, I agree with Ms. Cunningham. I mean, this is a good reminder that looking at the whole from time to time is very helpful because it sharpens the eye for looking at the reduction of that and the narrowing it down to actually actionable items. But this position that is that we are contemplating, et cetera, for me is literally about the project management and coordination on the things that are on the docket. I don't want to, mission creep here into things that probably is on our docket, and we should be thinking more creatively on how we engage the public and our constituents in things. What I really want to gain a little bit more of of insight is how this interdepartmental and intradepartmental work happens, and where if there are stumbling stones, if there are issues that that are difficult to manage, etc. What are these issues, so that we begin to understand that. I found a lot of smaller issues that were extremely complex, and it's a good thing to appreciate that, because we appreciate good work when solutions are found at the end. So that affects the resiliency discussions, because this is real money that we are investing here. So understanding a little bit how we get to how the solution process works is important. I mean, I really think about the jigsaw puzzle of the Trade Center study, for example. Just an example. So just that.
Thank you. All right, I think, so at this point, we are, by my math, which is never often trusted, at $2,450,000 out of that $3 million. A couple of other issues I wanted to bring up, and actually I'll ask our staff to come in a bit. We often have been for a long time about the Lee Center, and that is sort of moving forward with some studies, and Mr. Schwartz, I thought I'd ask you to kind of bring the board up to date on where you see that going.
This is my view of where we're at, and obviously open to additional guidance, so that we have had continuing conversations with representatives of the nearby Civic Association. We actually had a meeting. We had a meeting about a month ago when Jean Hensroth came in, and she has gone out on her own after working with the local Civic Association, found pro bono some architects who had come in with a concept. We've also, in the meantime, received, I think, is it two, or maybe it's just one, two unsolicited proposals from, you may call them philanthropists, I call them business interests, or outside organizations that are looking at different ideas they have about perhaps the Lee Center could become home to, we have a need in our community for additional housing options for seniors with some disabilities, and we've sort of run out of space at the Mary Marshall facility, and there's a few other ideas there. So when we had a meeting with the Neighbors and Civic Association, what I said to them was, let us go ahead and do the analysis of the building as it exists right now, because we really need to do that. And we have the money in there. And once we're done with that, I think it would be appropriate for us to come back to the county board and get your direction about what kind of requests for interest we want to have from outside parties, and get your direction about whether you want the building to stay as is and have something put on top of it or next to it, whether you want to maintain the green space behind it, what kinds of things we should entertain to have go with it, and what kind of community programs we want to have there. We did that with Lubber Run. Actually, I think the better analogy may be Arlington Mill, where we did that. I would say right now, we don't need money to do that, but we will need a lot of money to go ahead with the project. But I think the timeline, and Greg, you can tell me how long the study is actually going to take for the Lee Center. I think it's 6 months?
About
something
6
like
months.
that. Yeah. As soon as we're done with that, we'll come back to the board and ask you for guidance about next steps and have the community involved.
Yeah, and put out like an RFI,
Right.
request for information, which it sounds like there's already interest, which is,
Yeah, there is, and I do want to thank the community. I think that they're really approaching this. They have said, no, we can't just expect it to be everything that we want. We realize they're, keeping in mind some of the principles we've had with the community facility study. There are going to have to be other uses that go there with it.
and it's right on Langston Boulevard, where it is, yeah. Colleagues, questions, thoughts, comments for staff on Lee Center? We're good? Okay. Thank you very much for that update. And then we've had some talk about the battery buses and the replacement ratio, which gets pretty in the weeds. We've got some coming. So why don't, I don't know if it's you, Mr. Schwartz, or who, talk a little bit about where we are on the battery-operated buses and trying to figure out how we're going to study that and figure out what we really want to do. You just turned it off, so try again. You're good.
It's battery.
Battery-operated microphone.
Guys, you shouldn't laugh at that. It's not helpful. No, I think we sent some information out on the battery electric bus, replacement proposal. We are, transitioning per your direction to battery electric bus fleet over the next 10-year planning period, with that phasing of the purchase and replacement of existing buses coming in tranches, 4 different tranches, right, with some buses already ordered now through the end of the period. What we have laid out in the CIP is that, 1 to 1.3 a replacement ratio. This is us being very conservative and willing to reevaluate that replacement ratio as we get more experience. We do struggle with, on-time service. We are transitioning from to a new contractor. We're standing up the new facility. There's just a lot going on in the transit world right now, in our transit world right now. The CIP also, as you know, does include additional proposed funding, again in the out years, for additional charging infrastructure and additional land. And that is because with our existing facilities, the new facility that'll come online, hopefully later this year or early next year, as you all know, plus the light maintenance facility at Eads Street, on South Eads, in order to have the appropriate infrastructure to electrify those buses, we are losing parking spaces, right? And so we can't, with our plans, park the entire fleet when it's electric at those 2 locations. So we have included placeholder money in the CIP to begin to address that need for additional land and the incremental cost for more charging infrastructure. So that's, that's what's in front of you. And I know we received a question, if we didn't do if we only went to 1-to-1, would we save money? We would save money on the bus replacement and a little bit on infrastructure, but we really feel that we will have to figure out another facility solution. And we're also mindful about the desire and ask for beyond what's in the current transit strategic plan. What else are we doing for more transit services? So to the degree that we move that up, we have to have the land and facilities to operate that. I don't know if that's helpful, Ms. Garvey. Just a
We'll
recap.
find out. See what colleagues have got some
Okay.
questions. Ms. Cunningham, I'll start with you and move down.
Yeah, I just want to thank staff for the thoughtful response, which is posted online, on the CIP. If you go to the work sessions, then all these responses are getting posted there. And I do want to highlight, first of all, there have been some questions about, are we doing battery electric buses ahead of the life cycle of the natural gas buses? And the answer is no. Like, we're not taking natural gas. We will run those natural gas buses into the ground. If you haven't ridden one lately, we have ridden a few into the ground. So we are just converting over time in this CIP. That's what we have sketched out. And again, we'll continue to monitor the technology. So I think while the 1.3 is a conservative estimate, and we ask our staff to be conservative so we don't get in trouble, I do think it is realistic that those dollars, which are not even beginning to dribble in until 29, I think, we would reconsider spending them if we're really at 1.3, and not just because of the cost of the buses, but because of the land intensity, which is very costly for us. So I just, as we're planning, again, these are out years, so it's kind of funny money anyway, but to help us all keep ourselves honest, there is, and I probably can't read it exactly off here, but it's certainly tens of millions, it's probably approaching 100 million that is attributable to that 1.3 versus one-to-one replacement. Maybe I have it wrong. Maybe it's more like 50 or 60. But in any case, I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind, and maybe if we could, to keep it in the CIP as, remember, this is the contingency for the 1.3, because it can cause some additional anxiety about the battery buses that aren't specific to the battery buses necessarily. It's to some of the assumptions. So that was my ask. If we can do, I think the math is in here, and I'm not reading it perfectly as we're looking, but there's some additional costs because we need to expand the fleet no matter what. There's some additional costs for losing space to have the infrastructure of the charging, and then there's some significant additional costs that's in here as a contingency for potentially having the need for a 1.3 replacement. So that's all. To me, it's exciting because there's money in out years we'll be able to spend on other things, since I know we're not gonna have 1.3.
Okay. Matt, Mr. DiFrente?
Thank you, Chair Libby. So I want to just, I think we can avoid borrowing trouble on this one because it's out years. But I just want to confirm, I don't believe that there are expenditures in the next 2 years of the CIP that are contingent upon that ratio. I respect that staff is seeking to be conservative, but in the grand scheme of the world, where we can avoid having a disagreement until we know additional facts, I would love to do that. Is that understanding correct?
That is, and I say this not to be funny because we talk about this a lot when we're doing budgeting, especially in the capital area. We know the 1.3 to 1 ratio is wrong. We know. We just don't know what the right number is. And so people also, we spend a lot of time, and I think it's a credit to our community, focusing on trying to get everything really precise, that on July, what's today, the 15th? 16th. Yeah. That we know exactly where things are going to be. And we just really don't. By the time we get to a few months down the road, things have changed. And I'm always reminded, especially, and I think that we lose perspective on this, the county board adopted a CIP in 2018 that didn't assume a pandemic. You wanted to adopt a CIP in 2020 that had no concept that we were going to go into Barcroft. Yeah. Things change, and it's not like we're stuck for the next 2 years either. We'll come back as we learn things.
Yeah. So advocates who are listening will be like, how can you, I know, because they've talked with me and said, 1.3 is not right as a matter of justice. And I'm saying, I'll be right there with you. Yes. But at this moment, I don't think we need to adjudicate that question. And so that's why I like the contingency idea as we know numbers. I don't know the precise number, but I'm ready to come back to it. Where we can, at this stage, I'm not in a place where I think that it's worth trying to if we have additional money, I want it to go to climate-related things, and we'll figure that out. But because it's not in the next 2 years, I'm comfortable.
Yeah, thank you. Particularly because in the next 2 years, we're going to learn a whole lot.
Yep.
So, thank you. Mr. Carantonis?
Yeah, I mean, everybody said everything, but everything is said, but not everybody said that. So that's I just wanted to say that there is no risk to proceed as we have planned already. So I do think that learning will happen both ways. We will learn to deal with a new technology and a completely new fuel and completely new level of expertise in our personnel and how they use these buses and what the appropriate planning factors for these buses are. And therefore, I think that it's very premature right now to to predict what exactly will happen later down the road. I do think that there's even a good chance that we'll end up even in a better ratio than 1-to-1 in up in 27, 28, 29. Just because we have seen how the technology has progressed, and because these are vehicles that are, for example, less susceptible to other types of breakage and maintenance intensity. So for that reason, I think that I also align with the idea of keeping that as a contingency funding. It's of course not. I mean, I wouldn't call it funding money, but it's not money that today we can credibly say that this will be on the in the balance sheet, and that it needs to be spent or invested.
Thank you. Oh, great. Ms. Coffey.
One of the joys of going last again is people have said nearly everything to be said. I think the only other thing that I kind of want to see if we have a understanding or an estimate of is, based on what I've heard thus far, the need for additional real estate or like literal space for buses is based on the charging infrastructure and the design that is required in order to facilitate that. So even at a 1-to-1 ratio, we would need more land upon which to store the same quantity of buses. That's accurate. Okay. I feel like that's definitely helpful. And then the only other thing I would say is if, let's say, a 1-to-3 ratio is not necessary and we have these funds that have been earmarked in the out years for this, is there the potential that we could increase our total squad of buses in order to provide additional service using that difference in 1-to-1 versus 1-to-3?
Possibly, yes, depending on that land situation and how much land we have, right? The other thing I would just always to keep in mind, this, again, a longer term conversation, the transportation program is funded by dedicated transportation sources and a lot of reliance, not just on state grants, but I think if you recall back to the transportation presentation we made and the original kickoff presentation, we are assuming a lot of different federal grants that we have not assumed, we've not yet applied for, not received. We have a plan in place. I understand what FAC was saying, the transit strategic plan underlies those grant applications. I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's relying on grants that we have yet to get. Yeah, exactly. And they're dedicated federal, you know what I mean? So just mindful about the flexibility in what we're applying for. And hopefully some of those federal grant programs that we're interested are going to remain in light of the possible change in the results of the November election, just putting that out there when we're talking 5 years from now, so.
Life is uncertain.
It is.
Yeah, thank you. I think the only question I have, which I'm realizing now has nothing to do with my vote here or anything, at some point, how much land it would take if we transferred to green natural gas buses? What that would be, if instead of going to battery electric, we actually used what we were getting from our own plant and used existing.
So if we just stayed with the current fleet and then looked at the TSP, right, because we need those extra 11 buses to meet what we have, what the board adopted for the next 6 to 10 years in terms of service expansion, we're okay, but tight. Do you know what I mean? We're okay, but tight.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. I just think that's going to be an interesting technology that I'm hoping is going to kind of take off, because I think it makes a lot of sense, but that's where I am, and I won't be on this board later. All right, I think are we okay?
Can I just add one clarification, because we have received a lot of community input about this. The transportation funds that could potentially get released in a couple of years because they're that contingency fund, they are capital dollars, so they could buy new buses potentially if we plan them. They could do quick build projects and that sort of thing. They cannot pay for drivers and operations and more frequent service, and I think all of us want to trade those two things off, and the sources of funds are just not interchangeable in that way. So just want to highlight that.
There's a little bit of fungibility because we are paying for some TSP from the commercial real estate tax. I think the point that I was trying to make is that in the outer years of the CIP, maybe I just wasn't articulate, the purchase of BEBs and that replacement ratio, we're assuming coming from some specialized federal grant programs that would not necessarily, we'd have to go through the analysis, translate into a quick build project or a street project. Do you guys follow me? But we don't have a final answer on that. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah,
I think it depends. On
Exactly. So it's not dollar for dollar. If you pull those dollars out of BEBs because the ratio is the way we expect it to be, some portion might get reallocated to other builds, and almost none of it or none of it would be allocated towards service increases because those are operating dollars to pay for personnel and hours on the road. So that's also a goal, but not a fungible thing.
Grant funding has strings and requirements. Okay, I think we're ready. One last item, which, Mr. Schwartz, I think I'll ask you or somebody in staff to talk about, and that is the recent ADA ruling on bus shelters. Came out, I think you said in April and May, that is going to possibly change how we handle our transportation system and bus shelters. Do we know anything about that?
Yeah, so, those regs were just released. They could have an impact not only on ADA bus shelters, but our sidewalk projects, the Arlington Neighborhoods Program, all of those things. And I just have to say, we just don't have enough experience or evaluation to say, we're concerned about what the cost estimates are. We just need to get to that next round of projects and come back to you with what they think they might look like. I suspect during the operating budget, when we're talking about, some of those near-term projects, we might be able to give you more information. It's just really hard for us right now we have to get in design. I just don't know how to swag a number that's going to be in any way accurate.
Yeah. And I assume every locality in the country is going through the same study. And
it's easy to remember. They're really dog friendly. They're ProWag. ProWag is the name of the. Never mind. Okay, I'll leave.
Yeah, that's it. Sorry, we're about the end of the work session. We're running out of puns. We're good. It's okay. All right. Thank you for that update. Colleagues, anything more for the moment on the CIP? Because this will end our work session and staff will be putting things together. Again, I come out with, I think it's $2,450,000 out of that $3 million of unallocated PAYGO.
And if I could just note, I think our understanding is this would be heard on Tuesday evening.
Yeah.
The hearing is closed, so it'll be a conversation among board members, and we will do our best to get any language posted beforehand. But as is the tradition here, the board may take all the time it needs, including up till Tuesday evening, to change the language. So. All
right. Although I would hope that we would not. But we will see. Tuesday, I also will remind folks, is going to end up, I think it's getting to be a pretty busy meeting. I do have notes on guidance, two items I have here. And I don't know that we need to do guidance like we did with the budget, but I think we may want to have some things in writing which might be helpful to ourselves and our community and our staff on the whole sort of overall look at community centers and nature centers and how we handle that, and then resiliency centers. Those are the two I have. I think I'll just welcome folks to send some more to me and anything in writing, and I'll just kind of put it together and circulate it around, and we'll see what we come up with by next week, if that works out all right. I'm good to work over the weekend. I think we're good. All right. With that, it concludes our wrap-up session. We are going to convene. As mentioned, our upcoming July recess meeting is next Tuesday, the 23rd. Our regular meeting is Monday, right, the 22nd, Mr. Kushner? Yeah. So we're doing things a little differently this month. As a reminder, the public hearing on the CIP is closed, as the manager mentioned, so it's really just going to be the board talking, although we welcome folks, if you want to, send us some information, talk to us on all of our other ways of communicating with us, that is absolutely fine. County board at arlingtonva.us is open 24/7 for emails. I think with that, thank you. I've got down here, enjoy the rest of your evening, and I hope everybody stays cool. Take it easy. Take care. Thank you so very, very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.